billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. How are you guys doing this evening? This weather also giving you the doom and gloom? I'm trying to be positive. Positive energy is what we are going to attempt in this final hour that I have with you. So before we get into our conversation, you can get, extra barakah by helping us feed you can get extra barakah by helping us feed over 250,000 people for Ashura Muharram feeding project on the 10th of Muharram 1445. As you know, Radio 786 in collaboration with Muslims for Humanity will be feeding the needy throughout South Africa on the 10th of Muharram. You can sponsor a pot of food for just 3,000 Rand and feed 120 people. You can call us on 021 699 1786 to ask us for the bank details, or you can message us on 0786 10 11 12. So that's the Ashura program. So as I said, you can be a part of this wonderful day in making a person's life a lot easier. So to get into our conversation, I'm Farida Rabia Insoki in Cincy. Welcome to On The Kash. This is where you hear the difference on 100.4 FM. Now this, of course, is On The Kash together in Lately in Land and Housing, which is your weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, evictions, equitable access to land, and 10-year security. Today we will uncover women and land and what this means. So on the line we have Kensani Moteleni, attorney at the Women's Legal Center, who's going to speak to us, and a little later we'll have Sepo Fokane from the Research and Media Officer for Rural Democracy Trust. Good evening, Kensani, and welcome to On The Couch.
Thank you for having me.
So and we have Tepo on the line as well. Good evening, Tepo. Welcome to On The Couch.
Greetings. Thanks so much for having me, Farida, and hi to Kansani and the listeners.
So I hear that you guys are up in Joburg. Is the weather being nice to you guys?
So I'm actually in Nelspruit.
Okay.
So it's a bit chilly, but I don't think it's as bad as Joburg right now.
Kensani, how's the weather?
I'm in Cape Town, so the weather it's Cape Town weather.
Okay. So we're on the same boat. I'm really struggling with this weather. I thought we were going to have more sun for this week, but unfortunately not. But let's not talk about the weather. So we are speaking about, we are in incoming Women's Month next week as South Africa commemorates Women's Month in August as a tribute to more than 20,000 women who marched to the Union buildings on the 9th of August 1956 in protest against the extension of past laws to women. Now, the government of South Africa then declared August Women's Month, and the 9th of August is celebrated annually as Women's Day. Now, when we speak about women and land ownership in South Africa is a complex issue, and women historically faced significant challenges in accessing and owning land. In recent years, efforts have been made to address these historical inequalities to promote gender equality in land ownership. Although there are strides to be reckoned with, progress has been rather slow. Women's access to land was still limited compared to men. Customary and traditional practices often unfortunately discriminate against women's land rights, particularly in rural areas. So how do we celebrate Women's Month? How should Women's Month be celebrated? And when we think about women and land, how should we think about it? Anyone is welcome.
Okay, so I'll go first. I think the most important thing, I think, to just say from the beginning is that the ethos of the Women's Legal Center is that we don't really celebrate Women's Day. because we do women's work every day, like
Yeah.
throughout the year. And we also recognize that women issues are not a standalone issue, which need to be celebrated like once a year.
Yeah.
We also recognize that days like Women's Day and 16 Days of Activism and International Women's Day in March, they're very important days with great feminist initiatives, right? With rich history and context. But I think we find ourselves in a place where how government treats women and how society treats women becomes very problematic. And that is why it's very hard for us as an organization to say, actually, we are celebrating women, because there's still so much work to be done to ensure that women like achieve substantive equality, right? So I think for us, we don't really celebrate that day because we do the work every day. And that has always been our mandate, that we do the work every day to try see how far we can go in advancing women's rights and ensuring that women live a life that is free from discrimination.
But I mean, I suppose we can honor the women who marched on that day to speak against this oppression, you know. And when I was reading it, I was like, oh, bravery. You know, we are speaking about a time where the color of your skin gets you killed. You know, you don't belong in the society. And so women are like, listen, we don't have the time for this. I'm very tired. We as a collective are tired. And so this is what we want. And, you know, the country, government then recognizes that. So I suppose we can honor those more than 20,000 women.
No, definitely. Hence, I said that it's very important. Like, it's important to commemorate such days because they have great feminist initiatives and they have a rich history content and context to them. But it's just one of those things where it's very hard celebrating Women's Day when women are being killed every day, when children are being raped every single day, right? So I think it just comes from that yes, it's good to commemorate, but in 2023, where are women in the system?
Where are we actually in 2023?
100%. I mean, it's one of those really bittersweet months and days. All respect and thanks to the women who came before us and have done so much work in terms of organizing amongst themselves, mobilizing, showing people's power. We often, I think, assume that these 20,000 women were all known and had this big standing. But I imagine amongst them, there were regular moms, you know, sisters, aunts, cousins, daughters who were really, really brave at a time that resistance really cost us a lot. And certainly from our perspective as Rural Democracy Trust, we say thank you to these women because they gave us the foundation on which we can now do our work, you know, and we look at the realities and the frustrations around access to land and women's rights and equality. And we understand, obviously, that each generation has the opportunity to build based on the hard work of our predecessors. And we hope others who will follow us will also keep building.
Yeah. Kensani, I know that you said clear at Women's Legal Center, we don't celebrate this. Of course, we commemorate, but we don't. If we were to, if the organization were to, how would you have liked to?
I mean, it's a very difficult one, okay? Because also we are very realistic in how we approach our work and everything. And I mean, it would be lovely to celebrate where women can freely walk in the streets and not be mugged, not be raped, where women can like own land, right? Security of tenure and not be scared of being evicted or having their homes demolished. For us, substantive equality is like at the top of our priority. And that is what we wake up in the morning and say, this is what we are advancing for. And that is our mandate. So I think maybe when we get to a time where women have equal access to rights, to basic services and everything, then maybe we can with pride say that Women's Month is really, really worth celebrating. But unfortunately, when you look at the clients that walk into our offices every day to get legal advice and representation, that shows you that the lived realities of these women, especially Black women, that we're still way far off. And that is what makes it very difficult for us to actually take a stance and right out say that we are celebrating like a month and a day like Women's Day.
Tipo, how would you, in an ideal world, like to celebrate Women's Day month?
So with our partners, we're really lucky to sometimes do like a women's land rights caravan, and we travel across, a province or different provinces, meeting with women, listening to them, their frustrations, their successes. And it's not just about peeling back, the onion and having women tell their stories without any kind of intervention. From that, sometimes we get an opportunity to hear about cases that demand immediate intervention. And that's where your women's legal centers and all others come in, because for us, I think it's always an opportunity to sit and to bridge this intergenerational divide. When I came into the land space, I was obviously younger, so I met the threshold of youth. And now I'm getting into, almost 40. And so I think days like this and moments like this in the calendar give us a moment for pause. And we should definitely be critical of shortcomings of government. But we should also recognize the everyday victories of women and the small ways that women continue to show and to resist. And in an ideal world, this could be done without threat of violence, without threat of, evictions, just like Kensani is raising. But in an ideal state, it's an opportunity to sit together and to plot and to plan and to see where to from here.
07861011112 or 02169917886 to share your thoughts, questions and comments with us. We are speaking about women and land, but we just started off with speaking about how would we in an ideal world celebrate Women's Month, Women's Day, and if it's actually really worth celebrating. Now, so, Kensani, I know that the Women's Legal Center is an African feminist legal center that advances women's rights and equality using tools such as litigation, advocacy, education, advice, and research and training. And you also just touched on the women that come to the legal center to seek these tools. Do you find it to be, because I do want us to even move to the question about land and where we are with that in 2023. Do you find that to be a difficult position for you as an attorney?
No, most definitely, and I think the difficulty and the realization in all of this is that how when women walk through our doors and seek legal assistance and advice, that's when you actually realize that there are some policies and laws that reflect apartheid, special planning, for example, right? And one of the cases that we've done was where we were like, the second applicant was the Abdullah versus City of Cape Town, which has to do with the City of Cape Town housing scheme where women, where actually men were only allowed to apply for these housing subsidies if they were married, but women were listed just as dependents and not of equal status to the man, who would finally be a co-title deed holder at the end of everything. And I mean, this case only got resolved in 2023, like now in February, and now the city is taking initiative and doing media campaign to say all these women that had done these applications with their husbands back in the 80s can now come forward, and so that their records can be amended and recorded as co-purchasers. So you actually see that, and it's so disheartening, right? That in 2023 we are having this conversation, that in 2023 we're still addressing policies that reflect apartheid and segregation and exclusion of women.
Tsepo, if you'd like to come in, because I'm interested to understand Because, when we have a conversation about land, housing, and all of that, I don't know if it's really gender specific, but I wonder, I don't know if that's like missing in the conversation, but I wonder if a woman had to apply for certain things, are there disadvantages against her because she's female? Is that in, those documents that one needs to fill out? Do you find that, Seppo?
Not directly in our work, but because we're more focused on the rural areas, I think just kind of echoing what Kensani is saying, you would find that on commercial farms, women's rights to live on the farm are always linked to a husband. So as soon as his employment contract ends, the family's evicted, or worse, if he passes away. And so women are never seen as legitimate rights holders in and of themselves, and beyond obviously the ways that things play out on farms. I'm sure many people would be familiar with the conditions that farm workers endure, right? And for women, imagine having to use just, a bush or a tree when you're menstruating, because typically there are no portaloos in the fields, right? And for farmers that use drones, for surveillance, for women, what that ultimately means is your day-to-day dignity is being scrapped. So not in terms of the services women are looking for, but in reality, focusing more on the communal areas, what you would find is as soon as there's going to be any decision made about a community's land, the women holders of rights would always be discriminated against. So they become an easy target, a widow, an unmarried woman, an elder woman. These are all the soft targets of people that you can go up to, bully, and essentially, using the law, take away their land rights. Because there is consultation, there is consent built into our laws, but in reality, the practice is so different, It's so skewed against women. There are places where women can't outright even own livestock. So you're living in the homestead, your partner lives far away, you're providing every single day, but you don't get to own the livestock. You have to make a phone call to say, the cow is sick, what are we going to do? God forbid, you actually make any decision, because you aren't entitled in some communities to own livestock. Even to access land, you have to do that through a man.
We have to take a short breather. This is 100.4 FM on the couch. We are speaking to Kensani, attorney at the Women's Legal Center, and Seppo, research and media officer for the Rural Democracy Trust. We are speaking about women and land. More on this conversation right after the break. Hear the difference on Radio 786 100.4 FM. We are in your weekly show speaking about land and housing, and our topic this evening is women and land. And earlier on we spoke about the more than 20,000 women who marched to the Union buildings on the 9th of August 1956 to protest against the extension of the past laws. And so on the line we have Kensani, who is an attorney at the Women's Legal Center, and Seppo, who is research and media officer for the Rural Democracy Trust. So I know, Seppo, you were speaking about women in the rural areas and the difficulties that they have. I'm just interested to understand, when we look at the legality and the documentation and the procedures, what does it really say? Do you see it in black and white that it actually discriminates against women?
Thanks so much. So, no, on the surface, we have the base framework, the Constitution, and a number of laws that really uphold equality. But the practice and the implementation is where things fall apart. I'm thinking, for an example, of women in Limpopo. I mention them specifically because of a practice which is tribal levies. It's essentially a tax that is paid only in rural South Africa, typically in communities living under a chief. So for women specifically, that practice affects them the most because everybody might be paying levies in a community, but women find themselves having to pay additional levies, punishment as such for not being married or for having your spouse pass away because you don't, in your own right, have any entitlements. But on the surface, the laws are there to protect us.
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically, excuse me, my apologies. I'm thinking of the Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act, IPILRA, and this is cross-cutting in urban and rural settings. Because in our country, I think it's about 60% of the population is living with unregistered land rights. So our issues are the same, right? The way we live and how is not in the deeds office right now. It's not documented there and held there. But in reality, I think it's where you find that things slip through the cracks because there are so many practices that undermine and subjugate women. And that patriarchal and paternalistic framing is what holds women back. You know, can a woman make a decision with a plot of land? Can a woman make a decision about if her child goes to an initiation school? These are all interweaved together to suggest that because you are always going to be a minor in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of society, you can't, in fact, enforce your own rights. You can't make decisions, you know. And when women call us up to say, you know, my child was taken to an initiation school and I don't consent, it's always that tension between, well, customary law, and the simple fact that customary law is supposed to evolve. It's supposed to be all-encompassing. It's supposed to have, you know, alternative dispute resolution. It's supposed to really be the basis and the core of Ubuntu and Botho. But when these practices get corrupted, then you find that women are on the receiving end of bad legislation. But on the surface, no, the laws all speak of equality, and, you know, the state sets big targets, you know, to say 30% of beneficiaries of land reform are to be women. When you drill down, Farida, you would find that when women can access land, it's usually through male relatives. A woman on her own, no. And we don't have good enough data from government telling us, do women have secure tenure, you know, from backyard dwellers and urban areas and rural areas. We don't know if women outright are able to access and hold and use land, you know. But from what we see, it seems not. It seems that there's so many terms and conditions, and you've got to be a member of a community and belong to a family, and your identity has to be tied to a man, whether by marriage or by birth, you know, your father. All these dynamics is what keeps holding women back, but the law doesn't say that. The law actually is very accommodating and, you know, transformative, but when it's time to implement, those practices show themselves through and through.
There's a comment here that came through saying, Salam, in our country, women are allowed to own land and homes. Livestock, it sounds like this is a tribal customary issue. Am I correct in assuming that? If so, things need to change within the community. These women, in the community, these women stay. Someone needs to stand up, and I'm assuming someone like yourself, Tipo, is doing the standing up work. And then the comment goes on, we are a multi-party democracy. However, it seems that tribal law rules so sad because in towns there are more and more women owning their own homes. And I think that that's emphasis on owning your own home as a woman and not being tied to the male party, our male counterparts, because that in itself is freedom. And so when we speak about women and land, I imagine that if you don't have a place to stay and you don't have the luxury of having maybe father, brother and all of that stuff that can quote unquote protect you, then you left by yourself to fend for yourself. So land would be important. Having ownership of a property where you are safe would be important. I don't know, Kinsani, if you'd like to jump in there.
Yes, I'd actually like to jump in there. I mean, I understand probably the context that the listener is trying to make. However, I think it's also very important to note that the lived reality of women is so far removed from what our constitution actually says, right? And also that women don't face or experience discrimination in the same way. Like Tepo alluded to earlier, that women endure unfair labor practices in the context of farm workers, right? Because if you speak up against the farm owner, then what then happens? Because the farm owner is actually providing housing for you and your family, right? Women, on the other hand, endure abuse, right? So they can retain their homes. And speaking in the context of informal settlements in the Western Cape, for example, we have had women come to us and say that they have nowhere else to go but to just endure the abuse that they're getting from their partners, because their partners provide shelter to them. Yeah. Right. And we all know that when people live in informal settlements, you're living in informality. Right? The state can at any time come demolish your house or evict you. And then the other problem is that when you then become displaced, which makes you even more vulnerable, right? You will then be moved, if you are lucky, to alternative accommodation, which is far from all the basic services. It's far from schools, right? Because these women that are being moved have families, they've got children, far from healthcare services. And even if you have those kind of services, for example, as a pregnant Black woman in Kailicha, a doctor might come and place a practice, for example, you might be prone to obstetric violence, right? And ill treatment, even when you access primary health care at a district hospital, for example. So hence we always say that women don't face the same discrimination. In as much as we want to place women in one specific box, we can't do that, right? Because it's like a multifaceted thing. And that's why we do our work through an intersectional lens, where we're saying that if you do not have the right to housing, you're probably getting abused. You probably don't working in better conditions. You probably don't have access to healthcare, and. So I think it's also very important to recognize the different struggles. Yes, women head households according to Stats SA, but where are these houses placed?
Yeah.
How long have women being on waiting lists to get RDP houses in 2023? Does this list even exist? Let's take it a step further.
Yeah.
Does the RDP list exist? How many people in the past 5 or 10 years have received access to basic housing from the government itself? And let's bring it to the Western Cape context, whereas spatial segregation is very clear. So I think it's maybe unfair to maybe say that it's probably prone to one specific space and city, but it's also very important to recognize that women in rural areas and women in urban areas face numerous discriminations, and even in the domestic worker context, right?
Yeah.
Some women work in Sea Point, but they can't live in Sea Point. They have to travel long distances, or if they live in Sea Point, they live in very conditions that are not humane, and they can't even have visitors. They can't even have their family over. So it's those small little discriminations that people don't actually think it is actually discrimination until someone actually says, hang on, but this is actually problematic.
Yeah. 0786 10 11 12 for all your questions and comments. There's a comment here saying that the listener says that they do not understand what we're really discussing when it comes to land, when women have when it comes to land, when they have a woman as a minister talker, surely will herself advocate for women. If you two could comment on Minister Talker advocating for women, in particular land and so on.
I'll definitely jump in there. it is true. That is our current Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. In reality, I don't think we should make a mistake of seeing all women as our allies. I say that because of our positionality is going to be so different.
Yeah.
When we analyze looking at the three big ones, race, class, gender, we should not overlook that I might share a race and a gender with the current minister, but class, we are worlds apart. And what that means is that sometimes the ally you turn to or hope will advocate for your needs isn't in a position to, because it's quite far removed from their reality. Over and above, the work of the government and the department and all of the reports that are available out there around the shortcomings and how the budget has really been reduced for this department over the years, significantly so. I think there was a recent outrage the public would have seen when the VIP protection officers committed these acts of violence in public on motorists. And then out came, a comparison to say we're spending more as a country on VIP protection than we are on land reform. Now that's worrying, because what we're saying is access to housing, to land, to basic services, to all the different land uses out there, because women need more than a home. We want to be able to run businesses. We need to be able to have schools, clinics, all of the basic infrastructure out there.
Yeah.
There's so many areas around the country where you don't even have cell phone reception. So a call like this would be inconceivable for many women. Now, how then do you get help or go anywhere for services or assistance when the infrastructure doesn't exist? We've seen some of the really terrible roads out there. In a rural setting, it's more difficult because when the road or bridge washes away, you are not going to have an alternative. People become so isolated. Sometimes Department of Health tells us that they see minimal increases in home births. And the reality is it's because the clinic is far. It's because by the time you get there, the operating hours don't synchronize with when you're going to give birth. So I would say that respectfully, we do have high hopes for the minister and for the department. But in reality, as soon as we think about, like Kansani is mentioning, the different ways that we experience discrimination, we'll also recognize that there's going to definitely be a class difference between a number of women. We're speaking in some ways to very urban listeners right now, but we might also be speaking to rural listeners. And that immediately says our lived reality and our experiences and our lens is going to be worlds apart.
No, definitely, because as Kansani was speaking about, the woman who lives in Kailicha, who might live in Manenberg, who might live in Yanga, on this side of the world, the Cape Flats, in the townships, that has to travel all the way that side. And maybe you have that quote unquote luxury to live in the house of the owners that you clean house for, but then what are the sacrifices that you are making where that means like you're not with your family? So yes, discrimination against women, it race, class and gender, it's a difficult one, and you saying that not all women are our allies is a tough one for me to swallow personally, because you think about like we need to work together irrespective of where we find ourselves. So if you are in a better class than I am, then I expect you as my sister friend to want to find a way out for you, for the next sister, if that makes sense. There's a interesting comment that came through, and I don't know, maybe Kansani can comment on this. It says, good evening, what can we as women do about the widespread of exploitation of women's bodies in media, advertising and pornography? This has a direct bearing on our devaluing of women.
I think that's another difficult one, and I think that would obviously require like a proper client consultation to understand the context in which they're asking this. I know within the Women's Legal Center, we have a focus area called Women in Work, and they're also doing some work on the decriminalization of sex work, right? In order to ensure that sex workers are safe whenever they're doing their work. And I think this consultation would fall under that focus area, because then we would need to understand the different policies, the different laws that make it possible for these advertising companies to exploit women's bodies, right? So yeah, it's yeah, and I mean, it also intersects with violence to a certain point. So it's a conversation that would need to be held, but through a consultation. I don't think I have a direct answer now, because I would be misleading people. But I mean, if they need to further ventilate and have a consultation with us, they're more than welcome to. We provide free legal services, advice, and referral and representation to women in their diversity. So they're more than welcome to come into our office for a proper client intake in order for us to see how we can assist them.
I'm interested also to know, my technician is saying we have about 5 minutes. I'm also interested to know, when you were speaking earlier, we were looking at, the list, this invisible waiting list of people waiting for something that they're not going to get, because that's the reality that we are sitting in right now. And so what does that mean for those people? And then also, I'm wanting to know if we have a number or a percentage of those who are waiting on the list, the percentage of women and the percentage of men, and then how we see to cater to them. I don't know if any one of you have those answers, but it would be really good to know. But there's another comment here saying that Western Cape does not have a lot of spaces within town. We would all love to live near to our jobs, but it's not possible. Look at District 6. Restoration is still not fully restored. So speaking about emphasizing on the spatial injustice that we have, and the effects that it still has on people who are trying to get closer to those resources. And Tebo, you were speaking about, I'm not sure if you said a study but there's a lot of feedback around women in rural areas who are giving birth at home as a result of the clinic being too far. And it's ridiculous. How can this be happening? And so I'm thinking, okay, if this is the case, then does that mean we are then training the women in the rural areas to be able to handle this situation? And I know that for a very long time in our societies, women have been helping other women give birth, but there are dangers when it comes to that, in terms of maybe not having the right medication and all of the things that you need in that example.
Awesome. I'll just jump in quickly. So there's always been traditional birth attendants. This is the parallel to midwives who receive various trainings. But I think what happens is, when the situation calls for it, communities and women rally together and help each other. Like you're saying, that's in an ideal situation. It's safe for, mother and baby, but obviously there can be complications. And what it all leads to is the fact that we need rural development. We need to be able to readily and easily access services, and we need to really bridge this divide between urban and rural. We would like to be able to know that women's quality of life in cities and towns and villages is not that far apart. In terms of a question around numbers, I don't have numbers for housing, but I do know that in terms of accessing land, the state had released several hectares to people to say, you can lease this from government under redistribution. But the data that came out kind of shows that women are allocated fewer hectares than men. So women already make only a small percentage of beneficiaries, like 30%. But even when you come now to the size and the quantity of land that women are allocated, it was only like 17%, whereas men were being allocated 83%. What that tells you is that women are having a tough time. Furthermore, when it's time to lease land as a group, you would find that women always get an opportunity to become leases of government land through a collective. So that was 83% of the time. And only 17% of the time could that happen as individuals. So that kind of tells you that women's access in terms of redistribution, which is, I think everyone recalls, one of the big pillars of land reform, women are still getting, the raw end of the deal.
Kinsani, if we can have 1 minute, I have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry, Kinsani. I really wanted to hear your closing remarks. I don't know, my technician is giving me a lot of signs. Do I have 1 minute, 2 minutes? I have 1 minute, Kinsani. Could you, in 1 minute, if you could conclude for us?
I think maybe the most important thing to say is that, yes, we have right to housing, but in the Constitution, it further says that it's progressive realization, right? Which means that within the resources that the state has available to them, and that's probably maybe why we say that the list is quite invisible, because people have not been receiving access to housing from the government itself. So I think the most important thing to say is that if women are being discriminated against or excluded in any way, they are more than welcome to contact our offices. We are based in the CBD, and we can see how we can best assist them. And I have a further thought on the 10th of August, where we'll further break down these policies and what they actually mean for women living in Cape Flats. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, ladies. That's 100.4 FM. We were speaking to Kinsani, an attorney from the Women's Legal Center, and Tepo, Research and Media Officer for the Rural Democracy Trust. Again, guys, don't forget to be a part of the Muharram and get your extra barakah. Call us on 021-699-1786 and make a difference on the 10th of Muharram, as we will be feeding more than 250,000 people. That's all I have for you this evening on the couch. Up next is Reflections with Ayub Ali. Again, as always, so much more in store for you on 100.4 FM. But from me, so in a hurry, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.